don't think people have really taken a deep look at what they mean by Jesus and who Jesus Christ is to themselves, how they would define it. And they haven't, if they do define it, if they see any contradictions, I often see this whole, like, well, you just got to have faith. And that's such blind ignorance that I don't even know how to comprehend it. It's like you would not do that with anything else in life. But when it comes to this subject, it's just like people just completely put on their blinders and think that that's somehow excusable. In fact, it's applauded. Well, that just goes to show me that we really don't know our history. You know, we really don't know the story of who Christ is, which seems really hard to miss, being that, well, you get certain ideas. What comes to mind is, well, who killed Jesus? You know, like, well, the government killed Jesus, right? You know, because he was a radical. You know, he was now he wasn't violent, but he was a radical nonetheless. Like, okay, so like if I ask people right now, whoever's watching this, I would say, are you familiar, and if you call yourself Christian, I would ask, are you familiar with who the Essenes are? Now, if you don't know that, you don't know who Jesus is. And so that's like, because that's a critical part of the story. Like the Essenes, you know, they were a sect of, and they believed in a certain ideology of God. And if you don't understand that, then how can you understand who Jesus is? Because, well, the parents of Jesus were Joseph and Mary, and they were both Essenes. And so, well, then, so that's probably a good idea to understand who the Essenes are, right? And then, you know, how about who are the Gnostics? You know, like if you consider yourself Christian and I ask, who are the Gnostics? If you don't know who the Gnostics are, it's really hard for me to consider you a Christian, because it's like, you don't know the story. I mean, you can't not understand this part of the story and be able to put together a synthesis of a logical concept of Jesus Christ. And now you can just say, look, Jesus is God, and just stop there. But I don't see how that's going to be functional in your everyday life, especially when you come across certain concepts that contradict each other. What's your position going to be? Well, somebody who believed in Jesus Christ would consult what Christ would do, right? But if you don't know who Christ is, then you have no way of figuring that out. And so practically speaking, if you don't understand these concepts, these narratives, these stories, then how can you call yourself Christian? The Gnostics were the first Christians. Like the first 100 years after Christ was crucified, after Jesus was crucified, you know, there were this sect of believers, and it was a loose sect of ideology. And then you know who came in and smashed on them? Was the government, just like they smashed on Jesus Christ. They smashed on the Essenes. They totally devastated their history and their ideology, but they took parts of it, right? The Jesus Christ story, and then what did they do? The same thing we do today. You know, they made it a product that you could sell to the masses. And that's the false church. That is the whore, and that's most people calling themselves Christian. Jesus Christ, that people, and I say this because I want to attack, full-on front attack of this idea of Jesus coming back, because I believe that Well, a lot of the problems that we have today could be solved if the Christians really were Christians. And so what's actually happening is insidious in the sense that these people are hiding behind a veil of ignorance. And that way things are not being done. And in fact, that ignorance is being used against them so that people that do know the story can keep those people in line and moving in a certain direction. And if you control most of those people, then it doesn't really matter what the fringes say, even if they know better, because, well, they'll just get picked off and die off because you just cater to the masses, right? And so we've got all these situations on our hands that could be dealt with swiftly and promptly if we understood who Jesus Christ actually was, and that the second coming of Christ is an unveiling, the revelation of the divine human within you. But you have to understand the whole story of Jesus Christ, who he was, where he came from, how the Essenes thought, how these ideologies, how these different things fit together, and how they came about throughout history. If you don't understand that, you can't understand how it's been manipulated. And even if you understand that it's manipulated, that's no sense for us to totally abandon the whole thing, because it's ideologies that run the world. And so we're wrestling with ideas. So we want to know what the best ideas are that are in line with reality. And that's what these people were wrestling with. Okay, so that's why it's a spiritual battle. And they ain't telling us about what it really is, because, well, the information that Jesus Christ was telling the people was the gospel, was the good news. And the good news is that you have eternal life. And he had come from a sect of people that believed in a certain order of things, and that through this the divine is manifest. We can see these in different factors. And so when Jesus was here, he embodied the eternal spirit, and man turned around and said, there is God in man, the first fruit. Like, this dude has unlocked something that shows the divine potential of man, of where we're headed, and there were certain people that had ideologies about this, and what it meant to be eternal, and what it means to be in the present now, and how all these folded together, whether you're talking about Platonic theory, or you're talking about Pythagoreanism, or all these different ways of breaking down reality. And or you can go even into the East, whether it's Buddhism, or with some of the other ones, Islam. All these ideas are encapsulated in these stories, and they wrestle with it through different lenses. But there are concepts that we can work with to start to pull back the veil of what reality is. It's just like growing up as a kid, like when we were children, we thought as kids, but then as we learned different things, we saw in different ways. And so when you talk to a kid don't understand what you're talking about on certain levels. You gotta break it down to them, and even then, it's still not something that they've experienced. They're just kind of like, okay, and it's just like that. And so, well, that's the process of salvation. That's how the process of eternal salvation is being unfolded, and we come to a believing, or come to an understanding of what already has been from the very beginning. And that's why they said it's finished, it's done, it's complete, because it was already planned from just how reality is structured, that things fold into themselves. There's no waste, so the spirit is always moving, and we're given, in this lifetime, we're given an opportunity to focus on certain parts of reality, and to bridge the gap, as it were. We can see that there's all kinds of different ideas that we could focus on, but we look at where our society is and see what they're looking at, how they're setting their priorities, as it was, out of everything that we could be doing. And that's what really sets us up to manifest what we're going to bring forth into the world. And so if we see that society itself is celebrating values that are not going to bear good fruit, it's not going to bring us into a place where we're thriving, well, then it's our job to, as individuals, to see how we could be, see where we are, and see how we could bridge the gap. How can I use language, modern day language, to explain the problems of today that tie into the unfolding of nature, of causal history, right? And we can go back in time, and the further we go back in time, what we see is it's not linear, it's secular. It goes in cycles, in frequencies, in patterns. And that's why there's archetypes, and that's why we have symbols, and we can use these symbols to convey concepts in language, and pull those together to tell a narrative, a story, to see how these mechanics work. Okay, and that's what all of these religions are trying to do to the average person. They're trying to give them a foot in the door of, like, look, these are the basics of how things have worked. But, well, unfortunately, we don't have very good teachers, and we don't have a lot of good teachers, and we have a whole lot of people that are okay with being lazy and ignorant and not pushing forward on some of the subjects that are relative to what we should be focusing on. Like, there's a different season in all of our lives, and so if we're slipping in one way, then we need to focus on that and see how we can work on that. We can't just ignore it and act like it's going to go away. And so that's one of the things that I see going on in the church, and that's what it's talked about in the book of Revelation. It's the whore, and it's the false church who thinks that who has a false idea who Jesus Christ is. And I'm saying presently to you that if you think that Jesus is going to come down in the physical clouds, okay, and like, that's not what it's talking about. If that's what you think, then you don't even understand your own salvation. You don't know how that manifests. You don't understand. And that's what Paul was saying when he says, I wish that I could give you meat so that you could chew on, but you still are sucking on the tit. You still need to be fed by milk. You can't digest this stuff yet. Why? Because you're not there yet. You're not stepping up to the plate. You haven't internalized the what he says is you don't even understand what the resurrection is. You don't understand what baptism is. He says, like, you don't understand these initiatory things. If you don't understand those, there's no way that I can tell you about this other stuff. And that's it's a combination of us not wanting to. It's just like we don't want to do it in our own lives. That's how society does it. We get comfortable, and it's fine. We all understand this, but like, everybody's got comfortable to a certain extent, and that means that there's a part of our nature that's being neglected, and that's going to manifest. And that's that's why he said there will be a falling away in the last days, so that the revealing of the Antichrist can come. Well, there will be a falling away, meaning we will look away from who God really is, and then the Antichrist, well, the spirit that goes against who God really is, will manifest, because, well, we're looking at shit. We're not, and so then that will have to be revealed, and then we'll see that, and we'll have to turn back. And it says, well, in the end days, these books will be opened. Well, they'll be opened because we've lost those precepts. We've lost the understanding of how reality works. And this has been difficult for me, growing up, and I can speak for I'm sure a lot of people that, you know, this materialistic society that's just like hell bent on science seems to give you uh, a full working model. Okay, but it's not able to give you um, why or a purpose. It's just a how. It's just a this to that. Well, that's not helpful. That's, and it doesn't mean that we're imposing something on it just because we say that there's order. We all agree that there's order. So it's not relative, you know, completely relative. Like we can all look at different things or focus on one thing, and then we get different perspectives on it. And it doesn't mean that what we're looking at is not there. You know what I'm saying? Like there are certain, now we'll have different stories about what we see, but there'll be a consistent, and that's what they're trying to get at in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is that, and they are different, and that actually strengthens the narrative because that's what we'll see in these things. So yeah, I just wanted to. There's a lot more to the story that has not been conveyed. It has not gotten across to the masses, and it's not because this knowledge is secret. It's because people aren't digesting it. They're not looking at it in their lives. They're not taking the time to research these things for themselves and to figure it out for themselves. And it takes a while to unravel. Well, that's what I was getting at with living over here in the Western materialistic society, to unravel and get to the bottom of, well, I still don't have any meaning. And that's like when you get to the bottom of what numbers are. It's like, well, you can define a number and we can talk about and see how the math works and go 2 + 2 = 4. But what does that mean? If you just think it doesn't mean anything, well, that's just silly. Like, where did you come up with the number 1 in the first place? They mean something, and that's what the old religions were talking about. And so as we start to unravel that, then we start to get closer to what reality actually is. And as that happens, then, our perceptions, our inaccurate perceptions, start to fall away like scales from our eyes, and we go, and we've all experienced this to a certain extent, but like, well, we think we're so goddamn smart, especially here in the West, like in America, like we got this attitude, like, how could we know it all and we don't know shit, and we don't even know the basics of things, and it's just amazing to me, like. So anyways, I don't want to get off on a whole nother tangent, but I just want to talk about, like, the second coming of Christ is really what I guess I'm talking about, is the unveiling of the divine human within you, that the kingdom is within you. Okay? What does that mean? Who is Jesus Christ? Well, that's what the book of Revelation is all about, the revealing of Jesus Christ. And that's why I wrote the commentary, to try to put those ideas in a way, because I didn't get it either, because I came up in a totally different way of thinking. So it's super hard to let go of that. But there's a scripture that says, you don't put new wine into an old skin, an old wine skin. Why is that? Well, because they expand, they grow and they ferment, right? And if you put it into an old wineskin, it'll explode. It can't take it. And so you put it into a new skin, right? So what's that saying? It's like, you have to, like, that whole death, you have to die in order to live. You have to let go of all those perceptions. You have to stop thinking you know it all. You've got it all figured out. You don't know shit, You gotta start. That's what's sad. Is, and the thing is that as we get older, the longer we hold on to something, the harder it is for us to admit that we're wrong. You know what I mean? And then so we'll just double down on it if something comes in conflicts with it. Well, that must be wrong because I've been holding on to this forever. You know, there's this old story about how this dude was talking with this other guy, and they were having financial issues or whatever. And this guy was like, "Yeah," or this one of the guys was. He was like, "Yeah, I'm struggling." This other guy was like, "Oh man, well, all you gotta do is like, I've got these rocks, man, and they increase in value the longer that you hold on to it." And so, so he's like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, you know." So he gives him this rock, right? And so like, anyways, um, years go by. This guy ends up feeling like he must be a millionaire, right? So he runs into this guy, and the dude just kind of shrugs and's like, "Are you serious, man? I was totally messing with you, man. That's a petrified piece of shit you're holding on to, you know." And the thing is that even though the dude had told him that, like he still couldn't let it go. Like he was like, "Nah, nah," and then it took him years to like pull the fingers back to like, and that's how we are with our concepts, because we think that they work. And for some reason, they answer some question, but our question was faulty. It didn't really get at what we were looking for. But we came up with it and we just kind of fought it away and said, that must be the truth. No, it's just some assumption that we made that we've been holding on to. It's a petrified piece of shit.